Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spira-Bauer.
Welcome to the Getting Smart podcast. This is a very special episode because we have us at Getting Smart and a special guest who's also a podcaster. So I want to let her introduce herself. So Hayley, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Hayley Spira-Bauer. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Full Mind. I'm also the host of Learning Can't Wait. And this is a really cool episode because we both get to share instead of just being behind the mic and asking all the questions.
It's so awesome. So Nate McClennen, senior partner at Getting Smart, and along with Mason and my team, we do Catching Up as well as a bunch of other pods. And so this is like Learning Can't Wait and Catching Up at the exact same time. So both of us talk about education all the time. Hayley and I have met and had a conversation, I think at ASU GSV, and we just hit it off and started realizing that we both are thinking a lot about the ecosystem and the space that's out there. So excited for the convo today and wondering, Hayley, what are you most excited about? That was our first prompt for what are the things that are really getting us excited about learning and teaching right now?
So the world kind of turned upside down when generative AI entered the chat, and there was like this incredible hype cycle and everybody was all attuned to how our schools should change. And I don't think we've really seen that change come to fruition at scale yet. But what has me excited is twofold. One, I am really excited about AI's ability to reduce teacher workload. I think teachers are rock stars. They're the most important parts of an education ecosystem. A great teacher makes a dramatic impact on a child's life. And so if we can make teachers' lives better and make their workload reduced, we have the capacity to unlock a teacher's full potential, which ultimately allows us to scale impactful learning opportunities in classrooms. So that's like one component of what gets me excited. The second part of that, though, is maybe less intuitive, Nate. I get really stoked when I think about how if we can be innovative by thinking about technology in the way that I think a lot of people are thinking about technology now as a result of emergent technologies like artificial intelligence, then we can continue to get creative in how we think about a structured school day. And our school day today is the same as it was centuries ago.
Yes.
Like not much has evolved. So just like to start us off, those are the two things which are really commingled and related for me that get me really excited about education today.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I think mine's connect sort of, and I want to riff off both of these. But I agree with the AI, the efficiency piece. I think teachers, as both you and I know, they are the most hardworking people in the system, right? They are working hard. It always feels like there's too much to do. I know when I was teaching, it was always all day Sunday or Sunday night, and I was prepping, and then I would think about it Friday night to try to at least get ahead of it a little bit. And it's all consuming, despite sort of summer vacations and the breaks that are well earned and deserved. So I'm hopeful as well, along with you, that AI will increase efficiency and free up time to do things that are really valuable. But one of the things that I'm interested in or I'm excited about is this idea where by increasing efficiency, we can increase opportunities for human connection. Right. So human connection out in the real world, where teachers have more time to make connections with young people, which we know is impactful, and teachers have more time to plan real world experiences. So they're out because right now they don't. It's hard to make connections. It's hard to create really interesting projects. So I think I'll echo the first one you said, AI and efficiency, and then where does it go from there? The other thing that I'm interested in that I think we should put a pin in is this idea of, and maybe it's connected, this idea of ecosystems of learning where all learning is stackable. So you could go out and say, like, my daughter has a summer job and she's working in a restaurant. There's all sorts of learning that goes on, but it shows up nowhere in her official learning record. It'll show up on maybe a LinkedIn account or something, but there's no competency documentation there. So all learning counts, is stackable, and then it counts. It's valuable for something. whether for credit or for further employment or whatever the case may be. So those are the things that I'm sort of thinking about and wondering where do we go with that? Like, which one do we want to riff on?
Wait, I have to just say, like, I appreciate the second bullet, but I want to go back to what you said about free time. You
Yeah.
know what I think if we wanted to dive into too, we could talk about is this idea that teachers get back their free time. There's more time for human connection, but then also teachers are less burnt out. We
Mm,
have less of a labor shortage. We have less concerns about having the best teachers remaining in the classroom because they're not as fried from doing that Sunday thing you talked about,
yeah.
Nate.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember going to the public library in New York City every Sunday with my colleague and
Right.
pulling books out of the shelf and planning our lessons. Like that's a 6 day a week job. And that's as if I didn't work on Saturday too.
Right. Right.
So I think there's a lot to unpack there.
So what does it look like, Hayley? Though. So let's imagine let's even talk 5 years from now, because I think this thing is moving fast. And right now,
Yeah.
if schools are reacting at all or districts are reacting at all, they're in the policy. A lot of them are in the policy world.
Mm-hmm.
Forward-thinking districts and more are adopting Brisk or Magic School or some of these efficiency tools that sit on the desktop. I just saw a study in a survey that about 6 hours of time has been saved. When they look at average, and that's a survey and a self-reported survey. So
Sure.
what does it look like next? Do we just buy back time and that's a good thing because I think that there's this overburden project or problem, or do we reframe what the school day actually looks like in its entirety, like you
Well, that's
first
my
started with?
dream.
Yeah. So
That's actually my
talk
dream,
about your
Nate.
dream. What's the dream? What does it look like? Describe it
Yeah.
for us.
Well, I first of all, teachers are human beings. And so every teacher has an innate skill set. And when I think about how we want our kids to be raised and what we want school to look like for them, we want them to be diving into their passions. And if we get back some time in the school day, and if teachers can think more about human connection, can they also think more about playing into their strengths and really diving deep into becoming subject matter experts on
Mm,
different topics and blending a school community to have these highly reinforcing, highly engaging school days that are both highly reinforcing and highly engaging for kids, but also for teachers? We have this disengagement crisis happening at the kid level right now in America, where kids are routinely more disconnected from school, less motivated about their learning. There's tons of research that's been put out over the past couple of years. And if teachers were more passionate about everything they were doing because they could personalize and think more deeply about content areas that excite them, I guarantee that joy and that excitement will trickle down into kids.
hmm.
This is a big pipe dream though, Nate. I don't know.
Yeah.
You're in schools all the
Yeah. Yeah.
time. Like tell me what you're seeing that you can step 5 years ahead.
So, okay, a couple things. One is I think that the way you describe it is sort of this team approach, and sort of the ASU
Yes.
prep, or Mary Lou Fulton down at ASU is talking about next education workforce and teams, and they're alluding a little bit to those structures that you're talking about. Having some
Mm-hmm.
teachers have some expertise, and it could be pedagogical expertise, it could be subject area expertise, and they're working collaboratively as teams. So I think that's a really important ingredient, because I think often teaching is isolated and you're with young people all day and you don't often have time to collaborate, etc. So I think that's one part of the puzzle. I think another part of the puzzle that you allude to is this idea of agency and self or interest for the teachers. What they're interested and passionate about matters, because we know motivation comes when someone has agency and control and sees purpose, etc. Where AI I think might be really helpful, and we're starting to see this in some of the AI tools, is how do you then allow that work, say on really interesting projects driven by teacher co-design with the learner, then satisfy the requirements at the state level, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's the pinch point right now. Everyone's worried about you've got to hit the standards because it's
Right.
assessed, et cetera. And so it's easier to adopt curriculum that is already linked to the standards. However, that's not personalized, it's not high agency, and it's not high passion for the teachers. Can
Right.
AI allow us to do that linking in the background so that the passion projects for the students and the teachers are then linked to the outcomes that are expected, right? There's this policy
Mhm.
expectation and requirement
Right.
that bumps up against agency. So what do you think about that in your classroom of the future?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about elementary right now. That's my most of my background is in elementary schools, and it's my certification area in New York State. And I think about what happened on those Sundays. What happened on those Sundays is I would know what the lesson told me I had to teach, and then I would go get the book from the library and I'd read it. But what if it worked the other way around? What if it, and this is how I did it in my later years, to be very, very honest, of my career. What if I wanted to teach my kids all about Basquiat, the artist, and I wanted them to incorporate Basquiat into every part of their day? AI can help me do that in a minute. It can help me talk about color theory, talk about the art of Harlem and New York City and the different artists that came out during a particular time, which is both history. It could bring in the mathematics. Like, all the work that I had to do in
Mm.
my later years of my career, I had to sit down, I had to connect it, I had to do the research. Now AI can do it for me in seconds. So when we talk about an approach that's really cross curricular, or even a team approach, I could bring in my art teacher, the math specialist could come in and could be using the art to help my students to work on their numeracy skills in early elementary school. Like, all of that could happen so fast now. Whereas before, it required really careful planning. So when we talk about that time back and what
Mhm.
it gives us the ability to teach our students through the lens of one foci. That's not necessarily the curriculum that's provided by a specific provider. It's
Yep.
actually more user generated and personalized for the teacher and the classroom. I know that, and I realize like what I'm doing here is somewhat balking the tradition, but I think we have to balk tradition in a sense.
Yeah, and it's not. It's actually, I mean, in some ways, it mirrors the real world, right? And I hesitate and put that word "real world" in quotes because we often say we're prepping students for the real world or getting them ready for the real world, but nothing about school, at least the traditional school,
Yes.
actually it's real for the students, meaning the school is real. They're going to school and it's their real lived experience. But in the real world, say you and I are going about our day to day, we have projects that we do. We work in interdisciplinary teams. We're finding out things. We're using technology to solve problems, and we're advancing a project forward in some way. School
Hmm.
doesn't work that way, except for folks that are on your podcast or on our podcast. There's a lot of innovative examples of project-based learning schools or schools that are
Oh,
doing
yes.
real-world learning. Or so there are a lot of people out there playing on the margins. But what I think is that AI will enable us to connect the margin players, those that are doing the work that is actually more mimicking of what happens when you're an adult,
Hmm.
and the requirements that are expected of them. Because I don't think we're going to go into this free form where everybody is, at least in the public sector, that where everybody can choose their own outcomes and their own standards. That's not going to happen. There's still going to be some
Right.
regulation, but
Yeah.
it's the linking of the passion projects, the work of the students and the teachers that are of interest and purpose and have work towards the common good or whatever the case may be, that then check off all the expectations along the way that are expected by the state. I think that's where AI can play a super interesting role as well.
What do you think the challenges are of trying to bring some of these more progressive project-based models like we see at High Tech High as an
Yeah,
example to scale? Like, I think you're kind of calling them out in subtext there, but I want you to put a pin on it for
yeah.
everyone.
I think okay. So number one is there's a compliance challenge, right? So most teachers, especially in the public sector, feel like they are trying to meet a set of standards, and those standards are going to be a show up. Especially if you're in ELA and math, they're going to show up, and sciences and history in some states, they're going to show up in the standardized tests, right? So there's the fear of missing something, right? And especially if some of your salary, whatever the case, is linked to performance, that's a challenge, and that's not in all
Mm.
states. So you have compliance as one issue. I think comfort and confidence. Strong PBL work, project-based learning work, is not taught in most schools of education. It might
Right.
be a peripheral course or a part of the practices course or pedagogy course, but it's not an entire section. It's not ubiquitous through most schools of education. So most folks are feeling not as secure in that. And I think there's a platform you might be familiar with called Inquire. Inquire is one of a couple different project-based learning platforms, and we've been playing on that with a couple partners, and it makes project-based learning way easier. And so I think, and it's using AI tools to quickly link and make suggestions to standards to cover once you enter your project.
Mhm.
And it's built on High Tech High's framework, so it has a lot of practice and pedagogy behind it. So you have compliance, you have comfort in doing that, and then I think there's something around so comfort in designing project-based learning, and there's something about releasing control with students, right? Giving agency to students. And in a school that's really strong, project-based learning, problem-based learning, whatever you want to call it, the classroom is just humming because the students are finding purpose, they're finding agency. But that takes a little bit of letting go by
Oh,
educators,
yeah.
right? So those are the three things I would say. What would you add to that? What else
Well,
is
first,
there?
I just have to give an anecdote. My favorite story is about the first time I had laryngitis in a classroom and my kids ran the classroom themselves. It was actually eye opening for me. I was like, oh, we've set up the structures and routines. They have enough agency, they have enough motivation, they're bought in. They actually can run the classroom without me. And it became a goal every year if I got laryngitis that my kids were self sufficient enough to be able to dig into the learning themselves, because ultimately that's all I cared about. I don't
Right,
need them to learn the content. I need them to learn how to learn.
right. So interesting. What grade was that? What
That
age
was
group?
fifth grade. It was
Yeah.
fifth grade.
You know, I
Yeah.
had I had a similar experience with. So I started out as a very traditional high school teacher, and I taught math and science. And my first year of teaching, I was absolutely lecture based because that's
Mm,
how I was taught. I was
sure.
writing notes on the board, and every day my voice, I lose my voice, my hands would be covered with chalk because we're still using chalkboard
Right.
from that day. And by the time I ended my sort of teaching and moved into bigger picture work, is for at the landscape level, I was building playlists before people were talking about playlists, because I realized that if I built a playlist, we had a lot of options and choice in it, the students could all work at their own paces, right? And that made sense to me. And
Mhm.
suddenly I was giving up control, and that felt so different from
Right.
where I started, 22 years earlier. So similar
Mhm.
transition. But you mentioned something interesting that I want to think about is you talk about sort of the content as not as important as the learning to learn. What's your perception on, a lot of standards are content based. There's a body of knowledge that standards sort of try to articulate and set of skills, but then we have this whole other conversation about competencies and durable skills and transferable skills, of which learning, being a learner, is one of. How do you balance those things? How do you put those things in combination?
So I want to call, like, I have a little bit of a bias here because I'm neurodivergent and I didn't know this until recently, probably like 4 years ago. But my entire childhood, I had trouble memorizing content.
Ah,
I was labeled gifted and talented, but retaining information was hard. I didn't really know why. And so when I look back at my own education, I devalue the content in that I don't remember it. I don't even remember when I finish a movie what happened in the movie. But I know I like know how to think, and I was taught how to think, and I think that has served me well. So I say that because I do think a lot about personalization and individualized learning. And so I feel really strongly that, it's that proverb: we teach a person to fish, they fish for a day. Or you give them a fish, they get
yeah,
eat for a day. But if you teach them how to fish, they fish for a lifetime. I think there is a movement right now in our country towards this competency based learning, and it is focused more on what skills, sort of like you said with your daughter. Like, she
yeah,
has this job, it's not translating on a paper to her everyday life at school and her career. But if we give our kids these skills, and we really work with them on critical thinking and productive struggle and engagement with peers and all these other things that feel very soft, we know there's a ton of research, it serves people well for a lifetime. And so I am eager to see learning focused on that. I even think there's a place for AI there, because recall isn't as important anymore.
right.
You can recall any piece of information from the internet. You obviously have to check it for hallucinations.
Yeah.
Your fingertips.
Yeah. Knowledge certainly is no longer sort of the held by just the teacher who then delivers it. Like that's
Right.
obvious and started with the internet, and now it's getting easier and easier. And I was Mason and I have been riffing off the decline of the use of the internet, as I mean the of individual websites on the internet, because people are just looking at the AI summary right at the top. So if I want to know something,
There's an article about how SEO is dead, and now it's I just read it this morning. Literally, what you're saying is
yeah,
that agents and the summaries that are provided are replacing
right.
complete use of individual websites for information.
Right. So it's pretty easy to find information. I think that's clear.
Hmm.
I think my take is somewhat similar, but maybe I'll take it like a different tack on this. Is that I still think that there's a set of core knowledge. So you taught in the younger grades, and basic mathematics, basic literacy, although there's some semblance, as more and more becomes audio, I'm curious about the written language, and this is not because I don't want. I really appreciate. I write a lot. I love it, but I sometimes in the back of my brain I have this little flag that's saying, we can become a completely verbal society that's just video back and forth. But let's say for now, my take on this is still core literacy, core math. There's some core skills just to survive in life in the modern world. And then it feels like there's some, we're pretty bullish on this idea of media literacy. There's some part of
Oh yeah.
media literacy that's really, really important. There's some part
Mhm.
of civic engagement that's really, really important. And to be civically engaged, you actually have to have some knowledge of how the government works and how your local community works. So I guess when I start to unpack the skills of the durable skills of collaboration, communication, creativity, all those kind of things that we know are really, really important, I don't think they can operate without context. So which
Oh,
is not what
I
you're
agree.
it's not what you're saying, but I'm just saying I wonder about the knowledge that sets up that context. And is it locally derived, regionally derived, nationally derived, like Common Core did, or something like that? Those are the things I wrestle with in terms of
No,
outcome.
it's an important call out. And I would argue, like, going down the vein of civic engagement, it's a topic I talk a lot about on the podcast. It's something I'm personally interested in. And I think our country could use more of at the moment.
Yeah.
I think that civic engagement as an example and a call out, like, you absolutely need to learn about the history. You need to learn about the branches of government. You need to learn about voting. And can you do that through the context of being out in the world and
Totally.
learning about different organizations and how they function, going to Washington D.C. if you can afford it through a school or a grant or whatnot, to actually see it in action, take part in protesting, even if it's within the school. Like, I love when the kids in a school building are protesting, they want a longer recess. Like, yes, let's teach kids how to put a coherent thought together into writing, into oral form, into, all different media forms as well. So I go back to this idea of, like, what does my dream school environment look like? It absolutely has some direct instruction, but it can happen collaboratively. It could happen with students and teachers tackling together, but it also happens with teaching kids how to grapple with said content, not just trying to pour that information into their heads and hoping that they retain it.
All right. So let's circle back to your first excitement that you talked about, which is the use of AI. Do we think do we think collectively, you and I think that AI will start being better at teaching those core skills because it will be able to hyper personalize. So think Conmigo on steroids, right? It gets better and better,
Mhm.
and it's more of, it looks like someone like one of us, meaning a person, a teacher online, or probably have to be virtual, or maybe it'll be a hologram or a robot in the classroom or something. Does that take care of the core skills part? Because we really haven't done a great job of getting every kid up to speed in core skills. We know that, and a lot of it has to do with personalization. Um,
Mhm.
and then the teacher's focus is really on these projects, real world stuff, increasing civic engagement, media literacy, understanding the world around, and empowering students to understand the things that they're interested in. Are you bullish on that? Is that gonna, or is it gonna be a co-pilot scenario, or what do you think?
I feel like I'm more in a co-pilot scenario.
Yeah.
I see teachers as the harbingers of productive, joyful learning
Mm.
experiences, content included. And I could see artificial intelligence playing a pivotal role in helping the teacher to personalize their learning and providing practice opportunities for kids. Like,
Yeah.
I would have loved if, when I was in front of a classroom, and Nate, I'm curious your take on this too. I would have loved to have in front of me on my hand, like, these 5 kids have already mastered XYZ, these 4 kids haven't. Here's the play you make with those 4 kids, and here's what the other kids are working on. Like, or like, pair these 2 kids together. Like, my brain can do that, but I can't analyze information as quickly as computers can.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
exist when I was in the classroom. I was still using clipboards.
Yep. Yep.
Just not to age myself at all, but Nate, I'm curious, where are you? Like, you are, I mean, you have such a different vantage point than I do. What do you think is going to be the role of the AI teacher or tutor or co-pilot in the future?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a co-pilot scenario. I do think that in terms of specific sort of teaching to read, teaching basic math, that will probably be done on some sort of rotation model where the students are just like a classroom rotation model now in a personalized classroom where or a workshop model or something where they're going to be doing individual work. The teacher will, and already can in some tech platforms, as you allude to, can quickly get a sorting of who needs what every single day. And there's been so many great experiments. Like School of One in New York City has done this for a couple decades, where
Mm.
when I observed one of their classrooms, they had a resorting at the end of each day, and every day they'd come in and the kid would have a screen in front of the classrooms. It'd be 150 kids, and they'd resort into classrooms of 25 based on their performance at the end of the day. So we've been experimenting with this for a while,
Right.
but it's also the technology's been pretty rudimentary. So I think AI shifts that game. The human part of it, the teacher part, will be twofold. One is to facilitate that experience of a bunch of students all together, because I don't think we're going to go into this everybody's homeschool one-on-one at home. I think that the
Yeah.
socialization matters. I think that
Hmm.
the system of school, especially public school, allows different types of students from all different backgrounds to come together, and they're actually forced to work together in collaborative ways.
Hmm.
And that's a really uh, very, very important way to allow for the success of a democratic country. Like that's how the work,
Yes,
this
agreed.
discourse matters, right? So
Hmm.
facilitator, I think, of making sure that students are in the right place, the right time. Connections, so that if someone needs extra help, that teacher will certainly be an expert there. And so this is a co-pilot, and then planning. How do you make allow every student to engage in purposeful and meaningful experiences for them, and that they'll have more time for that. And that might
Hmm.
look like, hey, these particular students have mastered these couple sets of skills and standards. Technology sends me that, and they might be ready for a project at this level. Great. The
Right.
teacher can then start planning the project in partnership with an AI tool like, say, Inquire or whatever other tool you're using, so that they can quickly plan a project that's relevant for those students in
Right.
partnership with those students, especially as they get older.
You know,
So,
Nate, you in this world that you're painting a picture of right now, there's a critical component that you mentioned before, but we didn't dive into, and I'm curious how you would elaborate on this. But media literacy plays a huge
mm,
part in our ability to help kids learn to interact with emerging technologies, help them understand the world better. That in this rapidly evolving space, what does ideal media literacy look like right now to get kids ready for that future?
yeah, for me, it's as I tell my own children, it's be skeptical of anything you see online, and the only thing you truly can believe is at least what the person is telling you is something that you see and observe. Meaning, I observe something happening in the real world, thus it is true, uh, or and not on the screen, or it's a conversation between two people with where at least you know that I'm talking to you, Hayley, and you had said something. That means that Hayley said it, and because I'm pretty sure I'm not talking to an AI avatar right now, right? In the future, that may not be as sure. There may be challenges there. So
Oh,
I think,
real for real.
media literacy. I actually think we're doing a huge disservice to young people right now, as we're not putting media literacy at the core center of all curriculum, because I think it's becoming, information has always played an important role in the evolution of cultures. And I think the rate and the speed at which information is being sent to us, and the rate and speed of which AI is generating more and more percent of information, it is really challenging. And so that should be embedded in all areas, and so that students have a really healthy skepticism, and adults to really assume everything that you see is not true until proven
Mhm.
otherwise, which is a really
Mhm.
negative way to look at it. But I actually think that may be the way to go. What do you think?
Yeah. So, as you kind of alluded to earlier, I am a big believer in reading and math proficiency, specifically by grade 3 being a non-negotiable priority.
Yep.
Related to that, I agree with you. We should be doing it now, and we should be doing it early. We need to get our youngest minds before they are fully molded to understand how different the world is today because of technology like artificial intelligence. Um, how different it is. Because I'll give you an example. My kids don't have a full picture of like fake videos and fake images yet. They don't really know about AI chatbots. They hear me talk about it, and we have like larger conversation about society, but they haven't experienced it on a device. But one of my friends did, and she was saying that her kid showed her this like horribly graphic video. He's 17 years old,
Mm.
and she didn't know what to say. She was like, "This is fake." He's like, "Well, how do you know?" And
Yeah.
because it was the first time that he had that conversation, she was like, I don't even know how to explain it to you, but like, we have to have this conversation. She didn't even know where to start. And so I do believe, somewhat like the way I feel about really ensuring solid foundations of math and reading proficiency by grade 3, we also need to be starting it very, very young with kiddos, so that they know how, again, they know how to think about the world, even if we can't predict what the world will look like.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. It is there is some more and more data that young people are getting more and more of their news from TikTok, and I'm
Yes.
not a huge TikTok user, but I track it a little bit, and as you know, and our listeners know, one of the things about TikTok is anybody can put anything out there.
Mm-hmm.
So people are reporting as news rather than a centralized news system, and there's pros and cons to that. There's real power in the voice of individuals. The problem is that if it's used to manipulate or provide strong opinions to push someone in one direction or another, or it's just misinformation, um, we have to be able to make sure young people can quickly discern that and ask hard questions about it.
But Nate, it's not new. I agree with
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah,
I'm on TikTok actually quite a lot because I am fascinated by what
yeah,
you just named, the proliferation of information, both fake and real. It's not new. Like, we sort of missed our boat already with Facebook. Like, this is,
yeah,
right? Like, there is quite a lot of deep diving into how Facebook has changed our democracy, both like electorally, with the spread of misinformation, both on both sides of the aisle. Like, there's like a ton of investigative reporting on Facebook's impact on society. And if we want to really think about what might happen and look forward and not be pessimistic, but be really realistic about it, we need to think back to when I was a freshman in college before Facebook existed,
yeah,
and how we received information then versus how people receive information now, because
yeah.
that is really the best predictor of what generative AI and various tools are, how they're going to really quickly shape information
Mm,
gathering for the next generation of kids.
right. And it even there was an article I read recently. I think it was in the Atlantic about the advent of sort of information and how when newspaper they're talking about the emergence of widespread
Yes.
newspapers, right? Maybe you read the article, and
Yes.
it and the idea that the worry at that time was very similar to the discussion we're having now, is that we're
Mm,
being manipulated. There
yeah.
is people are reading it voraciously. They're addicted to their newspapers. Everyone's reading it more and more. There's
Yeah.
newspaper boys out selling newspapers, and they're pushing you with all these dramatic headlines.
Propaganda.
Right, propaganda, and also just what sells. And what sells is
Right.
drama and challenge and accidents and all those kind of things. And so it's ironic that 100 years ago plus, when things started emerging that way, the same reaction was happening. um, I still go back to my premise is that it's now at hyperspeed, and
Sure.
I think we've talked about this. Mason and I have talked about this a little bit in our pod catching up. But this Nexus, the book Nexus by Harari, is really really good. He wrote *Sapiens* as well, and he talks about the
Hmm.
thread of information and how the idea that we're accelerating the volume of information and the accelerating the possibility of sort of misinformation or manipulating information. Um, the volume information potentially it could be good or bad because more and more people are informed, more and more people are able to say what they believe, and that's representative in so many ways. But how do you discern it is really important. So I think there's a thread here where we're tying is that we probably need to be thinking about it more and more in schools,
Hmm.
and it needs to be tied into sort of thinking about AI as well as a part of the learning experience, not just AI as a tool to help teachers create a more sustainable and more interesting, more engaging lessons, but also students need to understand what is AI. It is a predictive modeling tool, right? It's just predicting the next word based on the previous set of words in a large set of
Yeah.
models. And then what is media? What does it mean to be media literate? And in the modern world, that might be a core for me. As you going back to your question you asked, like that should be in the core along with literacy and math.
Right. And to really bring it all home, Nate, I imagine a world in which every single classroom, every single teacher, every single student is playing with these tools on a regular
Yeah,
basis as
agreed.
part of their media literacy, right? So when you talk about what creates engagement, like, if you have a high school classroom and your teacher isn't literate about Snap and TikTok and all these other tools that kids are using all the time, you probably have a classroom that's a little bit out of touch.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I've Mike Yates is from the
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I
Teach
know, Mike.
America
Yeah.
Reinvention Lab, and I love what when he talks about school, because he really hits the nail on the head with what an in tune classroom and teacher and school community looks like. And if you go back to this idea of integrating early literacy and numeracy skills with project based learning and AI, like how do you do that? You do that by like living in the real world with the kids. So
Yeah.
if you're studying about, and I need to pick something I know a lot about here, plant growth.
Hmm.
Like you should then go watch a brain pop video on brain about plant growth. Go look for TikTok videos. Go look for generative AI videos of how plants grow. Like compare the three, right? Like that seems so maybe not what a parent thinks a kid should learn about in school, but actually is what kids need to see in order to understand what technology is and how it changes our perception of the world. And then it just solves all of our problems.
I love things that solve all of our problems. So I think we're
Right?
starting to center on this idea of educators are really co-learners with the
Yes.
students, right? And
Yes.
so they are masters at facilitating this magical piece. And great educators do this already. They have this
Yes.
dance of being in a classroom, and you know when you walk into the classroom because the kids are independently doing the things that they need to be doing, and they can
Mm-hmm.
quickly articulate, this is where I've been, this is where I'm not now, this is what I need to do next. It's all full of, I call them high agency classrooms, right? Classrooms that have
Yes.
tons and tons of agency. I think maybe what we're getting to is we need every teacher to be able to facilitate a high agency classroom or learning experience, because it might not happen in a classroom, uh, and that takes a specific set of skills, confidence, and practice that I think many educators actually just don't have an opportunity. They may want to do it, but they don't have the opportunity to do it. So maybe the direction we need to take this is, how do you build these learning environments that are high agency, where the educator is learning alongside. They don't know, they don't have to be the content expert, but they do have to be the facilitation and coaching expert. And that's maybe what we need to really focus skills and relationship expert, right? Focus skills for
Mm.
teacher on.
Yes. Yes. I
So how does
love
that
that.
happen? So can we get ed schools to pivot? Like, what does this look like? Do we start with ed schools, or is it done in the districts, or what does it look like to
You
make
know,
this thing
I
shift?
I do see some of this happening at Relay Graduate School for
Yep.
Education.
Yep. High
I
tech high
always
as
go
well.
back
High
to
tech high
Relay.
grad school. Yep.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always go back to Relay because I do think they're on the cutting edge of preparing teachers as learners for co-led classrooms.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more examples. That's just the one I'm the most familiar with. I got the good chance to interview Mamie before she departed as the head
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Relay, but you know, I'm sure there's. Do you have other good
Well,
examples of
high
this
tech
happening?
high. I think high tech high graduate school of
Right,
education
right.
does it right. So I think those are two good examples of of graduate school or schools of education that are doing things differently. The
Mhm.
challenge is that's like what, 1% of
It's
teachers
not
or
the
less.
norm, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so and I don't think it's for. I mean, certainly there's all sorts of it, and probably Mary Lou Fulton down at ASU, they're thinking about this because they're thinking about
Yes.
competency based, they're thinking about learning ecosystems and team teaching. And there's a bunch of other ones, but they sit in a bureaucracy that's really hard to pivot fast. So it's almost like they need a R&D centers within these these education schools that are actually saying, what is the next generation of teachers look like, and how can we move that faster within or outside of the confines of the approval process, the accreditation
Yeah.
process, all these things that take years and years. And what we need is months and months, right? We
Mhm.
don't, we need pivots happening now, not for a program 5 years from now. And the challenge with higher ed is that it's a 5 year from now system, right? And it's not a months from now system.
It's a
So
fair call out.
yeah. So anyway, okay. So we've talked a lot about the education side. We've talked a lot about what classrooms should look like. We talked about outcomes and what the outcomes with durable skills versus knowledge. Um, where are you seeing, like, let's just talk briefly about just systems change, and what do you think about what makes something, I use the word sticky a lot, like when a system changes and pivots to become more innovative and better reach all students, what in your experience, whether your own experience or your podcasting experience, what are the things that make it stick for the long run? Because sometimes it feels like to me that it's so personality dependent. Great teacher, great leader, great school board,
Mhm.
great state level leader. There's some
Mhm.
formula there that is
No,
the right time
I
and
know.
place, but how do you get it to embed deeply in the system so it doesn't matter? The people are important, but they just rely on the system that has it embedded. What's your thought on that?
This is really hard. This is
I
really hard,
agree.
Nate. So I'm obsessed with organizational psychology,
Okay.
and I think it answers the question somewhat, my take on organizational psychology. So first of all, I believe that any change you're making in a system, the leader needs to be exceedingly clear about who is making the decision on said change. Right? Like,
Mm.
is the leader making the
Yes,
decision? Is
yes,
the
yes.
leader gathering input and then making the decision? Is everybody, is it democratic? Are we all making the
Yep,
decision?
yep.
I think as a first step, if that doesn't happen, change won't stick
Mm, mm, mm.
because community members will feel like changes are happening to them. The second thing, the ingredient that I feel like is very important for systemic change to stick is that even if the leader is making the decision, they need to be a listener. And Nate, I'm a talker. You probably gathered that by now. But really great leaders have to listen and they have to listen to everyone. So they need to listen to community members, they need to listen to families, they need to listen to kids, they need to listen to teachers. That
Mm,
aspect of this ultimately means that even if they make the decision independently that is going to be enacted, they've gathered data points and they'll be able to integrate those points into the decision.
yep,
And then my last piece, and these are just three call outs of what I feel like are really important for systemic change.
yep.
The last piece is that you have to like think small to think big.
Love
You have
that,
to
love that.
really, yeah, you really have to invest in individuals. And I know you, Nate, are a really big believer in personalization, but even with systemic change, you have to think about personalization.
Yep,
You
yep.
have to think about how are you crafting the conversation for what change is going to look like for each individual stakeholder. How are you crafting it for
Mm,
communities of stakeholders? How are you, maybe you're not personalizing every aspect because at scale, that's impossible. If you're talking about a system as large as, let's say, Atlanta, it's not
right, right,
possible to
right.
like talk to every kid in the community, but you should think about those kids. You
Yeah,
should think about all the kids in the system before you're enacting a change. You should think about how your messaging will land with them, how you're best going to reach them.
yeah. I I appreciate those. I mean, I think the community listening super important, and I agree with it. Is that we have to start with what the community, all constituents, are interested in, and great districts that have had long term success are actively listening. The leaders are listening, the educators are listening. They're listening to students, they're listening to parents, they're listening to the teachers, et cetera. So I think that's true. I love the idea of thinking small. I think too often in education we have not adopted sort of the MVP, sort of minimum viable product
Mhm.
concept that's so
Yeah,
prevalent in business, where we don't value the mini experiments that are happening in classrooms by great
right.
teachers who are just testing things like my playlist idea, when you allowed your when you had laryngitis, right? These are all micro R&D moments that
Sure.
give aha moments for us, but there's no functional way for those things to scale across the larger system because they're teacher by teacher. So I appreciate the think small. I think the things I would add on, uh, a clear community vision of what the system should look like. So where are you headed? What's the North Star? And too often the North Star will pivot based on school board elections, based
Mm,
on leadership changes. But this happens often in startup schools. Like I've worked a lot to help start schools, typically public charter schools, but also then done a lot of redesign work in a regular public district. And it's much easier to establish a clear vision in a startup school because you write it into an application, you write it into a vision statement, and that tends to be stickier than a redesign process in a
sure.
public system. So, clear vision. And then the last thing I would add is this idea of how do you create a value or an ethos in the system that is pervasive around agency, pervasive around growth mindset, and those two things, can individuals have agency to do things as long as they're safe for student and they're helping students reach outcomes, reach the outcomes, the expected outcomes. And then that idea of growth mindset, is everybody willing to adapt and change, and are leaders modeling that and allowing that? So I think those two
Ooh.
things are important as well.
I really appreciate the call out for growth mindset. I'm always a little skeptical when people bring it up in education because Duckworth has
Yeah.
named that people have like kind of bastardized the
Yep.
idea in classrooms. But what I really appreciate about what you said there is that adults have to model it. I think also creating a culture in a system where it's safe to make mistakes
Oh, love
is
that. Yeah.
huge. Like the psychological safety of knowing that, you know what, we tried this experiment. It actually didn't work for kids. And here's how we're going to rectify that gap of what kids lost out on. And here's what we're going to change to do differently. I don't, I often don't think it's easy to do in schools because of the like political nature
Sure.
of school board appointments, superintendent appointments, et cetera. But
Yep.
if we can unlock that and allow for growth mindset, you really will see more stickiness to your original point.
Yeah, yeah. Which means that there has to be a strong agreed upon value set of how we operate in the system. And I think
Mhm.
great districts have and schools or whatever the scale you're working at, because it can happen at the classroom scale as well, have established a set of values that this is what we believe in, and we're all going to hold each other accountable for those, and we're going to
Yes.
practice and model those over and over. All right, now that we solved all the problems in education, let's
We've solved everything. We're done.
we're at 45 minutes. We can go on for a long, long time. Let's finish with maybe what would be the biggest change that we could make, that you could make, or that we would decide to make, or I would decide to make, that would have the biggest difference, which means for me would be better outcomes for more learners, right? So
Mm.
better outcomes for more learners, however we define that. So what's your list of key changes? We talked about a lot today, so maybe it's just what we talked about, but how would you summarize it for
Yeah,
our
mine, I definitely shared mine, but I'll like put it more concisely
okay,
here.
okay.
So I believe that we need to ensure that students are proficient in reading and math with early numeracy skills and decoding and phonics and phonemics and all of that goodness by third grade. I think we need to personalize, we need to fund personalized learning, whether it be high dosage tutoring, targeted small group instruction. We can use all the AI practice tools. We'll build that in so that kids have the opportunity to practice with the learned knowledge that they gain from their teachers. And related to this, I think I don't understand why we don't have universal early screening.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
For so many things. I cannot tell you the times in my life where I had fifth graders or sixth graders in my classroom who had dyslexia and they just never knew. And they got to sixth grade without reading proficiently, competently. They couldn't do any part of their school experience because they were missing this one fundamental piece. And so if we were able to rectify this by third grade, if we really poured investment into early childhood in the ways that I've named here, I fully believe we would have the ability to dive more deeply into areas of interest, make more of the changes that we've discussed here on this podcast a reality.
Yeah. I agree with all those. And maybe what that's really coming down to is I think I'm just going to stick with one thing is just personalization. Is
Mm.
that we know that every human is different, right? Every human brain is different from every other human brain. And yet we know that there's a set of skills, maybe some level of knowledge, early literacy, early math, et cetera, and some sense of how the world works. And a set of big picture competencies that will help them thrive. So we have a sense of what those are. So we know what the target is, and we know that all humans are different. And so
Mhm.
we need to build a system that maximizes for that person's brain how to get to those established outcomes. And that is personalization. And I think AI is going to
Mhm.
help us with that. I think better at schools of ed and systems that create more agency, more relevance, et cetera, will help. But all the things we talked about today will help us better personalize so that every student comes out feeling like they understand how to thrive in the world, they understand the path they're going on, et cetera. So I think you're right on, and I'm super hopeful. Like, hopefully, this doesn't sound like a pessimistic conversation, and we're not just talking in the 100 years from now, because I think both you and I are talking to people all the time, we're
Yeah.
observing people all the time in districts that are doing this work all across the country and the world. There are people that are doing really, really interesting work that are actualizing what we're talking about today. We just need to have it become mainstream and institutionalized. And so
And
that's
that's
what I'm
why,
hoping.
and Nate, I think that's why I really love the fact that you and I both have this opportunity to podcast because the storytelling allows us to shed a light on communities others might not know about, projects others might not
Yeah.
know about. Like I get the chance both through my podcast and through Full Mind, working in hundreds of districts across the US, to see the very best of the best and what's working really well. So by sharing those stories and turning the mic on for them, it really allows more people to learn about how greatness can happen and what building blocks and stepstones they need to get on in order to make it happen in their own home, in their own community.
Yeah, I'm super optimistic. Same thing for us. We look at the landscape all the time, and we're more and more excited about so many systems across the country, across the world. We do most of the work in the United States, but we occasionally international work that are doing amazing work, and they're
Yeah.
practicing and testing this, and by podcasting and talking about it and blogging about it, we actually bring all these examples to light that show, you know what, it's possible. This
Mhm.
does and can happen in the world, and our goal is to help more and more people see that that is a reality and provide them the skills to do that. So excited. Haley, what a great conversation today. So excited to catch up on a public podcast, and hope we can do more of these occasionally.
Yeah, this was so fun. Thanks for letting us merge our audiences for the greater good.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. All right. Well, have a great day, and thanks so much.
Bye, all. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.